Rain walked the desert like a tired drifter that night, slow and stubborn, needling the tin roof of a one-room cabin where a single lantern kept losing nerve and catching fire again. He had one boot off, one boot on, a coffee mug cooling by the stove, when the door took a soft knock, three thoughtful taps, the kind that ask permission before they ask for help. Elias set the mug down, said the plain American thing a man says in lonely country, "You good out there?" No answer. Only rain and a breath on the other side, ragged as a torn hymn. He opened the door anyway. She stood under the eave, hair pasted to her temples. A widow's black traveling coat shiny with mud and road water, eyes holding that faraway lightning a person gets when they've been brave too long. "I'm Mara," she said, voice catching on his name, though he hadn't offered it. "I lost the road." He stepped aside, like men do when there's decency left in them. "Flagstone slick. Careful now." She crossed the threshold, and the lantern put a coin of gold on her cheekbone, and he saw the simple ring on a chain at her throat. Not showy grief, just a promise she kept wearing so the world wouldn't forget. He gave her a towel, a place by the stove, poured the rest of the coffee, and didn't crowd the silence. Out here you learn the difference between prying and listening. Wind pushed at the chinks. The room smelled of wet leather and cedar. She looked at her hands as if they belonged to somebody else. "Storm took the bridge," she said finally. "County road just ended." He nodded. "They do that sometimes." When he handed her the tin cup, their fingers brushed nothing racy, just the honest shock of skin after a winter of going without. She flinched like memory bit her. He started to pull back. She didn't let him. Not grabbing, not begging, she simply laid her palm over the back of his hand, steady as a church bell at noon, and said, almost apologizing to the air between them, "Don't pull away." The lantern crackled, a moth made one foolish circle and settled. Her eyes were wet but not fragile, more like rain, polished stone. "Please," she added, breath thin, "let me be alive in this moment." It was not a bargain for pleasure, it was a citizen's petition for mercy. Out past the window, thunder rolled low like cattle beyond the ridge. He could have joked, could have warned, could have shut down the whole thing with a gruff, "Ma'am, I'm not that man." But there's a kind of American mercy that lives in small rooms on hard nights. You don't fix people, you keep watch while they fix themselves. "You don't owe me a story," he said, leaving his hand there because she'd asked with the kind of dignity that doesn't bruise. "And you don't owe me anything at all." She laughed once, a small, unpracticed sound that startled her. "I owe myself one easy breath," she said. "Just one." So they stood in the honest light of the lantern, letting the room choose its temperature, letting the rain talk to the roof, and he felt it then, the shift when grief stops punishing and starts asking permission to go to sleep. He took a slower breath so she could borrow the rhythm. She matched it, one beat late and then right on time. If you were listening from the porch, you'd say nothing much happened. But in the ledger, the heart keeps. A page turned. In a county where folks wave from the wheel and mind their fences, two strangers signed a truce with the past without saying the past name. And that, as sure as wet dust makes good clay, was the first true thing of the night. Morning didn't so much arrive as it settled. The rain quit before dawn, leaving a hush so deep that even the stove seemed to listen. Elias had gone out to split kindling, the swing of his axe, pacing steady as a heart, learning to trust again. Mara watched through the fogged window, hands wrapped around the tin mug he'd refilled with water gone lukewarm. The steam from last night's coffee still ghosted the air, cinnamon and burnt sugar, the scent of something ordinary trying to be kind. She traced the rim of the cup, remembering how long it had been since anyone had looked at her without deciding what she should feel. In the mining town she'd left behind, folks meant well but always found a way to turn pity into spectacle. "Poor Mrs. Daltrey," they'd whisper, still setting a place at the table. That name, Daltrey, felt like a stone in her throat now. The world still thought she was married to a man buried under a collapsed shaft 2 winters ago. John Daltrey, foreman, good with his hands, bad with luck. She hadn't corrected them. Some ghosts are safer alive in rumor. Elias came back in, wiping rain off his collar with a wordless nod, the kind of gesture men in quiet places use for, "You okay?" She nodded back, maybe meaning, "I will be." He poured himself a cup, black as the soil under his nails, and asked, almost shy, "You come from Silver Bluff?" She smiled faintly. "From what's left of it." He said, "Heard the whole East Tunnel caved in. 23 gone." 24, she corrected, not looking up. Then softer, "I kept the count." He didn't say sorry. Out here, sorry wears thin fast. He just let silence do the work, and she felt that mercy, the kind that doesn't need to name the wound. After a while, she asked, "And you? You talk like a man who used to follow orders." He chuckled under his breath. "Army. Border regiment. We built fences that didn't keep anything out." "What happened?" He shrugged, eyes drifting to the small metal cross hanging by the window. "I came home. Only the body made it." She understood that kind of half-return. Grief recognizes its own reflection. "Was it someone close?" she asked. "Two someones," he said simply. "Brother and best friend. Same bullet, wrong day." The room breathed slow around them. Neither of them flinched from the stillness. They'd both lived too long in the noise that follows loss. Outside, the desert steamed, a thin mist rising from cracked earth like forgiveness trying to escape. She stood, wrapped the shawl tighter, and said, "You ever think some people are just built for surviving, not living?" Elias studied the axe handle resting against the wall. "Maybe surviving is living, if you keep your hands open." She frowned. "Meaning?" He sipped, leaned against the counter. "When you close your fists around pain, it's the only thing you can hold." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her eased. It wasn't attraction yet, it was recognition. The moment when one broken compass finds another still pointing north. He offered her a piece of cornbread left from yesterday, dry but honest. She broke it in half, gave a nod of thanks. They ate standing by the stove like old friends who didn't have to fill the air with stories. After breakfast, she walked to the doorway, looked out at the pale horizon. The storm had washed the sky raw and new. Her reflection in the window was strange, hair tangled, eyes swollen, but there was color in her cheeks again. Behind her, Elias said quietly, "You can stay till the bridge dries." She turned halfway. "That's kind." He tipped his hat. "Ain't kindness, ma'am, just decent sense." That little word decent hung in the air between them. It meant something out here: boundaries, respect, a promise not to take what wasn't freely given. She stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching the damp dirt, and for the first time in years, she noticed how morning light could hurt and heal in the same breath. In her chest, the ache shifted, not gone, but rearranged. She whispered to herself, "Maybe surviving isn't all there is. Maybe I'm allowed to want peace, too." Inside, Elias watched through the window as she tilted her face toward the sun, her shoulders no longer collapsing inward. He didn't smile exactly, but the corner of his mouth softened, like a man remembering that the world hadn't run out of gentle things yet. The wind carried a loose scrap of her shawl across the porch rail. He caught it, folded it neatly, set it on the table beside the coffee pot. A simple act, but in his mind, it was a small prayer for two people who'd stopped being ghosts, if only for a morning. By the time the second night came, the sky had forgotten its storm and learned how to breathe again. The desert air turned cold and still. Even the crickets seemed cautious, unsure if quiet was a promise or a trap. Inside the cabin, Elias fed another log to the stove, its orange eye widening, throwing slow-moving shadows across the wooden floor. Mara sat on a small stool, mending the sleeve of her coat with black thread she'd found in a drawer. The rhythm of her hands matched the tick of the cooling kettle, the kind of domestic music that makes loneliness sound less sharp. Elias spoke first, his voice carrying that low drawl that made simple words feel worn and safe. "You so like my mother," he said. "Was she a careful woman?" He smiled. "Careful enough to keep 4 boys in one piece." Mara's needle paused in midair. "You one of the 4? "Second. The one she worried least about, and maybe should have worried most." The line hung there a moment, warm but edged with something unspoken. She knotted the thread, set the coat aside. "You ever go back?" He shook his head. "They've all gone different directions. We write sometimes, but letters don't smell like people." "That's true," she said softly. "They don't sound like them either." He nodded toward the old phonograph on the shelf, its crank rusted. That thing used to play hymns. Belonged to the preacher who built this place. Why'd he leave? She asked. Ran out of believers, Elias said. Then after a beat, maybe he left one behind. Aye. The way he looked at her wasn't the way men look when they want something. It was the way they look when they recognize something sacred that shouldn't be rushed. Mara lowered her eyes, feeling that rarest of sensations, safety, the kind that doesn't ask for explanation. The wind picked up outside, brushing against the shutters like fingers testing a door. She moved closer to the stove, reached for the pot of stew he'd made from dried beans and smoked ham. The smell filled the room, earthy, honest. When's the last time you cooked for someone? She asked. He considered. Before the war, maybe. For my brother's wedding? Did it go well? He chuckled, eyes softening. Depends who you ask. Bride fainted halfway through my toast. Mara laughed, a quick, startled sound, like a window opening after a long winter. She covered her mouth, half ashamed of it, but Elias only grinned. That sound, he said. Keep it. Folks forget how good it feels to hear themselves laugh. Her eyes glistened, not from sadness exactly, more from remembering that joy once belonged to her too. When dinner was done, he poured her a small glass of rye whiskey, not for warmth, but ceremony. To surviving, he said. She shook her head gently. No, to living. He raised his glass, amended the toast. To living. The word felt strange on his tongue, like something both old and brand new. For a while they sat in easy silence, the kind that only happens when words would make things smaller. She watched the flames trace patterns on the wall and thought of all the nights she'd spent counting cracks in the ceiling, waiting for a grief that never softened. Here, in this borrowed calm, her body remembered another truth. Healing doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it just looks like stillness that doesn't hurt. After a long pause, she said, Back home, people stop asking how you're doing. They just look at you and expect you to say fine. Out here, Elias said, we don't ask much. We just notice who keeps breathing. Do you notice me? She asked, half testing him. I noticed you walked in wet and shaking, and you're still here, he said. That's more than fine. A small smile bent her lips. She reached out, touched the scar along his wrist, a clean, pale line. This one from the war? He nodded. I used to think scars were proof of strength. Now I think they're just the body keeping score. Then maybe they're reminders, she said, that we made it. Maybe they're both. The wind quieted again, as if it too was listening. Elias stood, adjusted the lamp wick lower, until the room fell into the gold hush of bedtime. He set a blanket on the couch for her. You can have the cot, she offered. He shook his head. You've earned the bed. I just keep it from getting lonely. She hesitated, fingers grazing the blanket. Elias? Yeah? She swallowed. If I talk in my sleep, just let it be. All right. And if I don't, let that be too. He nodded once, no questions, no promises. Just that steady presence that asked nothing and meant everything. She lay down, the mattress rough but forgiving. Through half-closed eyes, she saw him settle into the chair by the stove, hat tipped low, a quiet sentinel against the dark. For the first time since the mind collapsed, she didn't dream of falling. She dreamed of light, the kind that flickers, but never quite goes out. The third night came quiet as confession. The desert had dried into powder again, moonlight spreading thin across the land like spilled milk. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of smoke, cedar, and something faintly human, sweat, salt, maybe a memory trying to stay warm. Mara woke before dawn, heart pounding, unsure why. The stove was out, the room half dark, but Elias was still there in the chair, chin dipped to his chest, breathing the deep rhythm of a man who trusts the night not to betray him. She sat up, pulling the blanket to her shoulders. The silence pressed close, heavy with the kind of intimacy that doesn't need touching to make the air change shape. She thought of reaching for her boots, for the door, for any escape that would stop her from feeling how alive she suddenly was. But she didn't move. She hadn't felt alive in 2 years. Her eyes caught the faint glint of the ring around her neck, her husband's band, dull with years of sweat and grief. She rubbed it once, as she always did when guilt came hunting. The metal was cold, and she remembered the night they'd told her the mine had caved. She'd been boiling water for stew, She remembered the pot hissing as if it knew before she did. People came running, faces she barely recognized, saying words that didn't sound real. "He's gone," they said. She hadn't cried then. The tears had frozen somewhere deep and refused to melt. Now, in this cabin, with a stranger sleeping a few feet away, they began to thaw. She slid quietly off the bed, pacing to the window. Outside, the land glimmered silver dust on black soil. For a moment, she imagined her husband walking that ridge, boots crunching gravel, face turned to her like he used to when coming home late. The vision ached with tenderness, then broke under its own weight. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Elias's voice rough with sleep. "You all right?" She swallowed. Couldn't rest. It stretched, bones popping. Dreams again? Something like that. He stood, moved to the stove, and began coaxing a flame from the cold ashes. His movements were patient, deliberate, the way a man handles things that might burn him if he rushes. When the fire caught, he looked at her just a glance, but it hit clean and deep. "Sometimes the worst dreams are the ones that ain't dreams at all," he said. She wanted to tell him everything, the guilt, the loneliness, the quiet madness of surviving when someone else doesn't, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "I used to talk to him in my head. I still do sometimes." Elias nodded, no judgment. "You reckon he hears you?" "I hope not," she whispered. "He wouldn't like what he'd see." He frowned lightly. "You mean being here?" She nodded once, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I swore I'd never let another man touch me. It felt like the only loyalty I had left. And now?" She hesitated. "Now I don't know if it's loyalty or cowardice." The fire popped, a tiny explosion between them. He leaned on the table, voice low but steady. "Maybe it's just pain trying to wear the right name." She laughed bitterly. "You sound like a preacher." "M." He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Preachers talk about sin. I'm talking about weight and how much a person's meant to carry before it breaks their back." Her hands trembled as she set the cup down. "I feel like I'm betraying him just for being here." Elias stepped closer, slow enough that she could stop him any time. "You think he'd want you to freeze out your own heartbeat?" She turned to face him fully, eyes searching his. "I think he'd want me to remember him." "Ugh." "Then remember," he said, gentle but firm. "But don't punish the living to keep the dead comfortable." The words landed hard. She looked down, blinking fast. "You talk like you've done that before." He smiled without humor. "Every damn day." He pulled a small locket from his pocket, the metal tarnished, edges worn smooth. Inside was a faded photograph, two young men in uniform, smiling like fools. "My brother," he said quietly. "We took turns on lookout. He went to fetch water, I stayed behind. If I'd gone, maybe—" He stopped. "Anyway, I came home. That's the story." "And you think it should have been him?" "Some days," he said, "but guilt ain't a compass. It just spins." She stepped closer. The distance between them shrank to the space of one heartbeat. "How do you stop it?" she asked. He met her eyes, steady as the desert. "You don't. You let it live beside you until it gets bored." Her breath shook. "What if it never does?" "Then you keep the door cracked so something kinder can get in." The silence after that was thick enough to taste. She reached for him, not in hunger, not even in courage, but in surrender. Her hand touched his chest, feeling the steady pulse under the fabric. The ring at her neck swung forward and tapped the button of his shirt with a faint metallic sound. That small contact broke her. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder and whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't ask what for. He simply placed a hand on the back of her head, slow and deliberate. "You don't have to apologize for needing warmth," he said. "Cold's done enough damage." She cried then, not the sobs of a woman asking to be saved, but the trembling release of one who's been strong too long. Her tears soaked into his shirt, salt darkening the cotton. He let her cry until the sound turned soft, until the rhythm of her breathing found his. When she finally stepped back, her face was blotched and raw, but lighter. "You should hate me," she said. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Hate's for people who quit trying." She stared at him, lost between shame and gratitude. "Elias, I don't know who I am anymore." He looked at her like a man reading a map he already knows by heart. Then you're close to finding out. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge. The sound echoed, lonely but alive exactly like them. Mara turned toward the window, the moon laying a silver path across the desert. If I take one more step, she said softly, it feels like I'll lose him forever. Elias answered from behind her, voice almost a whisper. Maybe that's how you finally set him free. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the collapse, she let herself imagine a tomorrow that didn't hurt to touch. The tears on her face cooled in the night air, but her chest no longer burned. Inside the cabin, the fire steadied, small and sure. Guilt hadn't left, but it had finally been seen, and that made it something she could live beside. The storm that broke that night wasn't in the sky. It began in the silence, the kind that follows words too heavy to echo. The fire had burned low, all orange heart and blue breath. Mara sat near the stove, back straight, eyes fixed on nothing, her hands gripping the old ring at her neck as if it might keep her from unraveling. Elias could feel the air tighten, the way it does before a horse bolts. Something inside her was about to give. He said her name once, quiet, respectful, but it was enough to undo her. I can't keep living like a ghost, she whispered, voice trembling as if she were confessing to the dark. I talk to him every day, Elias, every damn day. I set a plate, I keep his coat on the hook, I fold the sheets like he's coming back from the mine. People tell me I'm strong, but I'm not strong, I'm stuck. He didn't move closer, he just let her speak. That was the thing about Elias he knew, when silence could save a person better than words. I thought if I stayed loyal, she said, I'd make the pain mean something. But it doesn't mean anything, does it? He's gone. The mine doesn't care, the town doesn't remember. I've been holding my breath for 2 years, waiting for permission to exhale. Her voice cracked. I don't know how. The ring slipped from her fingers and hit the floor, the small metallic sound sharp enough to split the night. She flinched like it had struck her. Elias didn't reach for it. He let it rest there, the sound still humming between them like an unanswered prayer. Mara, he said finally, you don't owe the dead your suffering. They don't need it. They already paid the price. She shook her head, tears running fast now. If I stop hurting, it's like he never mattered. No, he said softly. If you stop hurting, it's because he did. That broke her completely. The sobs came raw, deep from somewhere buried under all the years of pretending. She folded forward, arms around herself, body shaking like a dry branch in a flood. Elias crossed the room slow, boots whispering against the floorboards, and crouched beside her. He didn't touch her at first. He just waited, a steady shadow beside a collapsing one. When her breathing hitched and stumbled, he placed his hands on her shoulders, light as a question. Easy, he murmured. Don't rush it. Let it come through you. She leaned into him then, not out of desire, but out of exhaustion, like a soldier dropping their weapon. Her forehead pressed against his chest, and her tears left small dark marks on his shirt. The rhythm of his breathing found hers, steadying it, guiding it toward calm. I don't know how to live without guilt, she said into the fabric. You don't have to know, he replied. You just have to stop fighting the part of you that wants to. She lifted her head, eyes swollen and red, and for the first time she looked at him not as a stranger, not as a savior, but as another survivor. You talk like a man who forgave himself, she said. He shook his head. Not yet, but I'm trying. Every sunrise buys me another chance. Ugh. Something changed in her face, the hardness cracked, and what came through wasn't weakness. It was mercy. Mercy for him, for herself, for everything that had fallen apart. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his cheek, a simple, human gesture. The contact was tentative, reverent, like she was afraid of frightening it away. Elias didn't lean in. He just stayed still, letting her decide the distance. Her voice was barely a breath. Please don't pull away. This time, it wasn't about need. It was about trust. He lifted his hand, brushed a wet strand of hair from her temple, his thumb grazing the edge of her jaw. No urgency, no hunger, just presence. She exhaled, long and shaky, and her eyes fluttered closed. The fire crackled behind them, the last log giving way to ember. The sound filled the room like a slow heartbeat. When she finally leaned forward, their foreheads touched no kiss, just the quiet meeting of two people who had run out of ways to lie to themselves. She whispered, "I've been so afraid to feel anything, I thought it would mean I was betraying him." He answered, "Feeling something doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering you're still here." She smiled through her tears, a small, broken smile that looked more like sunlight than sorrow. "Then let me remember," she said. He nodded, and they stayed like that, breathing the same air, hearts stuttering in the same rhythm until the tears stopped meaning loss and started meaning release. When she finally drew back, the ring still lay on the floor between them. She picked it up, turned it in her palm. The firelight danced across the dull metal, and for the first time, she didn't see it as a chain. She saw it as proof that love could survive change. She slipped it onto her finger, then off again, then set it gently on the table beside the lamp. "Maybe he doesn't belong around my neck anymore," she said quietly. "Maybe he belongs in the light." Elias nodded. "That's a fine place for the dead to rest." They both looked at the ring glowing faintly under the flame, two survivors honoring what was gone by choosing to keep living. Mara took a long, trembling breath and said, "I stayed alive to pay for his death, but I think I've paid enough." Elias smiled, not in triumph, but in understanding. "Then stop paying," he said. "Start living." The words landed like a benediction. Outside, a thin line of dawn began to draw itself across the horizon. The cabin filled with the pale silver of morning, and the shadows retreated into the corners. Mara stood, wiped her face, and turned toward the window. The desert stretched wide and clean, no ghosts, no graves, just the open road and the sound of wind learning to move again. Behind her, Elias poured 2 cups of coffee. "To living?" he asked. She took the cup, eyes steady. "To living," she said. They drank in silence, the kind that no longer hurt. Dawn bled into the horizon, slow as honey slipping down glass. The rain had rinsed everything clean, even the air. The kind of morning that doesn't shout its arrival, just appears, humble and sure, like a friend who doesn't need to knock anymore. Mara stood at the window, hair loose, face washed pale by sunrise. The ring no longer hung at her neck. It rested where she'd left it, catching thin light on the table beside 2 empty mugs. For a long while, she didn't move. She just breathed deep, even, alive. Elias was outside chopping wood, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. The steady rhythm of the axe lift, pause, fall, sounded like the heartbeat of someone who'd made peace with silence. She watched him work, each swing deliberate, each exhale a release of something neither of them had words for. He looked up once, caught her watching, and gave a small nod. Not a smile, not a wave, just acknowledgement. The kind that says, "We survived the night, both of us." She stepped outside barefoot, the ground cool, the air carrying a faint sweetness from sagebrush after rain. He paused mid-swing and leaned on the axe handle. "You sleep any?" he asked. "Some," she said. "Didn't dream." "That's something." "It is." They stood a few feet apart, the kind of distance that used to feel like safety but now felt like choice. He wiped his hands on a rag. "You figure where you'll go next?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I thought I'd just keep walking until the guilt caught up again." He studied her for a moment, eyes narrowed against the light. "And what if it doesn't?" She laughed softly. "Then maybe I'll stop." A breeze passed between them, tugging at her hair. She could smell cedar and ash on his shirt, the simple scent of someone who built warmth instead of waiting for it. "Elias," she said after a pause, "you ever think maybe people like us weren't meant to be fixed? Maybe we just carry what's left and call it living?" He nodded. "Maybe. But carrying's easier when you put some down once in a while." They stood quiet again, letting the day settle around them. She glanced at the small stable behind the cabin, the horse there, white with age and dust, flicking its tail lazily. "He's old," she said. "Old enough to know better," Elias answered. "Like you?" He grinned, faint and crooked. Worse. Her laughter this time was easy, not startled. The sound warmed the morning more than the Sunday. After breakfast biscuits, coffee, the kind of meal that keeps you honest, they sat on the porch. The desert spread out in all directions, endless and forgiving. "You ever go to church?" she asked. Once, he said, didn't care for the roof. Too many walls between a man and God. So what do you believe in? He thought for a moment. Mercy. The kind that shows up wearing regular clothes. She nodded. You showed me that. He shook his head. You showed yourself. I just left the door open. The simplicity of it stung her eyes more than any sermon. She looked out toward the road, the long stripe of dust leading east. Somewhere beyond it was the town that had once been her whole world, now small enough to fit in memory. She took a breath that went all the way down. If I go back, they'll still see me as the woman who lost someone. Hi. Then show 'em the woman who didn't stay lost, he said. She smiled. You make it sound easy. He shrugged. Most hard things start that way. You just keep walking till it feels true. She turned to him, serious now. And you? What about your ghosts? He looked toward the ridge, where the light struck gold against the rock. I think they're still riding beside me, but this morning they ain't leading no more. Ugh. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the old locket with the photograph of his brother. For the first time, his fingers didn't shake when he opened it. He looked at the picture, then at the horizon, and whispered something too soft to catch. Then he closed it and set it on the porch rail. You sure? Mara asked. He nodded. He's had his watch long enough. Time I took mine. The desert wind caught the locket, flipped it once, then let it rest. It gleamed a little, like it agreed. They sat there until the light turned warm and full. Mara turned the cup in her hands and said quietly, You ever think it's strange? How mercy feels heavier than guilt sometimes? He looked at her, thoughtful. That's 'cause guilt's about what you can't change. Mercy's about what you still can. She breathed that in, felt it settle somewhere deep. After a long while she stood. I think I'm ready to go back, she said. Not to who I was, just back to the world. He rose with her. Then go with both hands open. She nodded, eyes bright. I will. She walked inside, gathered her things, her coat, her shawl, a small tin of salve he'd given her for her blistered hands. When she looked at the table, the ring still sat there. She picked it up, hesitated, then pressed it into his palm. Keep it? He asked, surprised. No, she said, closing his fingers around it. Bury it. Somewhere light can reach. I can do that. Thank you. He watched her step into the sunlight, boots kicking small clouds of dust. She turned once at the edge of the porch. Elias? Yeah? You said Mercy shows up wearing regular clothes. I think I just met her. He tipped his hat, the brim shadowing his smile. You best be kind to her then. She nodded, then started down the road, her silhouette shrinking against the pale horizon. Each step looked less like leaving and more like arriving. Elias watched until the wind erased her footprints. Then he looked down at the ring in his hand, small and unassuming. He carried it to the old oak stump behind the cabin and dug a shallow hollow in the earth. When he set the ring inside, the sunlight caught it one last time, a flash of gold against the soil. He whispered, Rest easy now, and covered it with dirt. When he stood, the wind had gone still. He felt the weight of the morning, clean, honest, merciful. Inside, the cabin smelled of coffee and ash. Outside, the day stretched wide enough for both the living and the dead. He went back to chopping wood, each swing lighter than the last. Weeks turned like pages, wind flipped on the prairie. Elias lived by small rituals again. Coffee before sunrise, the careful mending of fences, the nightly sound of the stove breathing in rhythm with his own. The ring he'd buried stayed where it was, beneath the oak stump, a secret between him and the earth. Sometimes, when the sun hit that patch of ground just right, he swore he could see the faintest glimmer, a wink from the past, not asking to be dug up, only thanking him for the rest. The cabin had grown quieter, but it was no longer lonely. Her laughter still lingered in the beams, faint as the scent of rain that the wood never forgot. He'd catch himself setting 2 mugs on the table, then smile, shake his head, pour one out anyway. Old habits die kind when they die honest. He didn't expect to see her again. That's how mercy works at visits, not stays. Yet one afternoon, months later, he rode into the trading post at Sage Hollow and saw a small group gathered by the well, a wagon loaded with blankets, barrels, and bright-eyed children. At the reins sat Mara. Her hair was shorter now, her clothes dust-stained but proud. She looked stronger, the kind of strong that doesn't need to prove itself. When she noticed him, her face lit not with surprise, but with recognition, like seeing a road you once took to survive a storm. "Well," he said, tipping his hat, "looks like you found your direction." She grinned. "Didn't find it, build it. The town needed a nurse. Turns out I still remember how to care for folks." He nodded. "World's better for it. You?" she asked. "Still chopping wood," he said. "Still listening to the wind." She laughed, the same unguarded sound that once filled his cabin. "Don't ever change that." A child tugged her sleeve, asking for water. She handed him a tin cup and said softly, "Be good to yourself, Elias." He answered, "You too, Mara." No promises, no goodbye. Just that easy truth of people who'd already said everything that mattered. As the wagon rolled away, dust rising in the amber light, Elias watched until the shapes blurred into the horizon. Then he turned his horse toward home. That night, he lit one lantern in the cabin window and left it burning. Not as a signal, not as a wish, just as a steady glow, for whoever might need to see that mercy had once passed through these hills. And somewhere down the long road, Mara glanced back once, saw the light, and smiled. In that shared silence across miles of open country, two souls kept their quiet promise: to live, to forgive, and to let the gentle things stay. Some stories don't end with a kiss or a goodbye. They end with a breath, the kind that tells you you're still here, still trying, still worthy of peace. If this story found a quiet place in you tonight, let it stay a while. And if you've ever carried something too heavy for too long, maybe you'll remember, you don't have to put it down alone. Out here, even the wind listens. Tell me what part of this journey stayed with you. Share it if it touched you. And subscribe if you want to keep riding with us through the stories that still remember how to heal. This is Noni, where mercy never rides alone.